What can I say about Tim Good? No, what can I say about Tim Good? Tim Good is an absolute legend in this field. Arguably the greatest British ufologist. I can't put it in any higher terms than that. He's got a new book out, which he's going to tell you all about. Without further ado.
Thank you very much for that warm welcome, ladies and gentlemen. As Gary's pointed out, I shall be discussing my latest work, Earth, an Alien Enterprise. And it's published in New York by Pegasus Books. Officially it was published on November the 14th, but copies were being sold on Amazon, I think about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and they still are being sold on Amazon. And Amazon UK is where you need to get it in the United Kingdom, because it's not published in the the United Kingdom at the moment. But Headline Press have taken it on, and the British edition should appear in, I don't know, maybe weeks, maybe a few months' time. The first chapter of my book is about the extraordinary adventures experienced by Mike and Leo Dworshak. Leo Dworshak was 12 at the time of the first encounters in 1932, and his brother was about 2 or 3 years younger. And for many months, they encountered a landed craft, a very large landed circular craft with 4 landing pads in Kildare, Montana. And they saw this thing for many months, and it was a long time before they actually were able to get to communicate with the occupants, because there was an invisible screen covering the entire landing area, a very subtle invisibility of this screen, and birds would fly into it and crash into it, and then they weren't killed, but they were slightly damaged, that's for sure, and certainly the boys couldn't get through. But after a very long time, eventually the screen was released, and they were able to approach several of the crew members of this craft, who had been checking most of the time that the boys observed them over a period of weeks, sometimes months. The aliens, human-appearing aliens, were doing something on the ground. They were picking things up from the ground, which it transpired were actually grasshoppers, and they were checking grasshoppers for evidence of pollution, because just around that time, new types of, not exactly DDT, but sprays, pesticides were being used. And I think the aliens, they explained that they have a very deep concern for the health of this planet, and they were just, even at that time, back in 1932, saying that we were causing problems in the environment. That just gives you a sort of overview of the entire event. And this went on for decades, actually. Mike Dworshak sadly was killed, I think, in the Korean War, but Leo Dworshak went on to have encounters right into middle age and well beyond. And there's Leo on the left. This is in World War II when they signed up for service. And Leo was in the Navy, and his brother Mike in the Army. And that's a picture I took of him a few years before he died in Montana. And I found him a very, very honest witness. He was also very well acquainted with President George W. Bush. And although this appears to be part of a type of political campaign letter, in fact, it is a real handwritten letter to Leo. And my information is that on several occasions, President Bush consulted with Leo Dworshak about events in the Middle East, and apparently Leo was able to give some information based on what he had learnt from his contacts, which lasted for most of his life. We've all heard of little green men. The ironic thing is that they are extremely rare, despite crisp packets with pictures of little green men and so on and so forth. This was one of the very few actual sightings of little green men, and I think it was the event in 1947 in Chiasso in Italy. It was experienced by a Professor Johannes, a very qualified witness. He was a famous writer in Italy, and he was paralyzed by these beings. He was unable to move for quite a while after witnessing the landing of their craft, and eventually he was able to get up and get back to his hotel. But it was a long time. He was quite paralyzed for a while, several hours. And they were apparently greenish, very strange eyes, as you can see from here. And they seem to have 8 fingers on each hand. That's not shown well here. But that is one of the very rare incidents of little green men. This is Pierre Monet, who in 1951 reported an encounter with human-appearing aliens. He was actually he'd been seeing his girlfriend in the middle of the night, and I think there was a 7-mile trip back home, and suddenly on his bicycle he was transported mysteriously in a split second. There was missing time as well, and he found himself in an area where there was a landed craft and beings. And I interviewed him in near Orange, his home in Orange in southern France, back in, I think it was 1978, and he very kindly gave me a copy of one of his books in French, and here is his sketch of what one of the several beings looked like. He said it was very difficult at first. At first he thought they were feminine, but in fact they were rather feminine-looking males. And then when this encounter with these beings, because they communicated with him telepathically, gave him a lot of information, had finished, he thought, well, I better get back on my bike, cycle all the way back, to get back home. And in fact, they actually transported him magically somehow, so that he was back instantly to where he'd started from. I don't know if any of you are familiar in any way with the photographs by Gian Piero Monguzzi taken in the Italian Alps. I'm sure some of you researchers here are familiar with these pictures, yes? Good. Many people have said they're hoaxes. I'm not at all convinced of that. In fact, there were 2 witnesses, and Monguzzi was the principal witness, and his wife was there. Monguzzi had he was quite qualified scientifically, and he was a member of the Italian Edison Society. And he and his wife suddenly became paralyzed. Everything went quiet, and this craft landed, and an occupant walked around it, allegedly. And I always thought it seemed a bit primitive, much too much like the Apollo astronauts. But this was July of 1952. I don't know, but at any rate, Monguzzi stood by the originality of these photographs, and I'm just not showing you all of them, but there's the final one. They actually rested the camera. Monguzzi was taking picture on the ground with a Kodak camera, which he rested on the snow. That's why the foreground is not in sharp focus. And this is a letter to a friend of mine, Louise Zinstag, who did a lot of research into this case, and she sent one of the photographs to the Directorate of Military Aerodromes in Switzerland, in the Swiss Air Force, and they came back and said that as far as we are concerned, we believe in the photograph that we've seen that it's absolutely genuine, and they were most impressed by that series of pictures. Eventually, I think Lou sent them more pictures. I think many of you are familiar with the claims of George Adamski, who's much maligned sometimes, but I have found out a great deal of information indicating that he was absolutely on the level, and I can't find any fault with any of the photographs. This was one of his iconic photographs of the so-called scout ship, which he claimed was about 35 feet in diameter, which he took through a very powerful telescope, one of many he took through a telescope in California. This one was from 1952. It's interesting that in 1998 I was invited to the Defense Airborne Reconnaissance Office at the Pentagon by General Kenneth Israel, who was in charge of that outfit. And this was a half-hour meeting during which I met some other members of his outfit, and he made it clear to me that a colour film taken by Adamski in 1965 at Silver Spring, Maryland, at which a friend of mine was present, Madeline Rodefer, was absolutely genuine. 2 United States government people were present at the filming of that event, as well as my friend Madeline Rodefer and Adamski, and maybe one other person. So I was very interested to get that information confirmed for me. And Adamski was always very meticulous about how he sort of reinforced the credibility of his photographs. And that photograph, as you can see, was taken with a 6-inch telescope. He had a very powerful 15-inch telescope as well, I believe. Many of you may not be aware that George Adamski, despite his reputation, actually held a United States government ordnance card. This gave him access to all United States military bases, not just throughout the United States, but throughout the world. Also, it gave him access to the White House, and he had several meetings as far as I've been told, with President Kennedy in the White House, with that access, the U.S. Ordnance Department access, which gave him access to the White House. This is Adamski on the right, and my deceased friend Louise Zinstag there, who was one of his Swiss co-worker. And second from the left is the mayor of Florence, and on the extreme left is the first guy to write books in Italian on UFOs. And his name was Dottore Alberto Perego. Adamski had 3 meetings at least with popes, secret meetings classified at the Vatican. The first ones were in the 1950s, and he had 2 meetings with Pope John the 23rd, and the last one of which, this was I think in 63, the Pope gave Adamski this gold medallion, which was not available for quite a number of weeks. 2 weeks later, officially available. And sadly, Pope John the 23rd died about 3 days later. This was someone involved also at that time with the so-called Amicizia saga, an Italian saga, amicizia meaning friendship, which lasted for 40 years and involved dozens of people from all walks of life. I mean all walks of life. We're talking about military guys here, we're talking very few politicians, industrialists, people who owned huge telecommunications companies at the time. And this was one of the guys. He wasn't highly qualified technically, but he was a very distinguished artist. He still is. I took this picture of him only a few years ago in Rome. And his name is Paolo di Girolamo. And this is another of those who was involved, and this guy took several photographs. Gaspare de Lama is his name. I'm going to show you that's one of his best photographs of these craft during the Amicizia proceedings, which lasted up to 40 years. Very complex, bizarre, sometimes farcical situation was involved with this Amicizia story. But I've gone into it in great detail. And this person I spent a lot of time with, together with my girlfriend who speaks Italian, and he speaks English as well, of course. He was a pilot, a scientist. And he was involved with the Amicizia outfit for many, many years. He regularly met aliens. He flew in their craft on one occasion with a German friend. The aliens were monitoring everything very carefully from a distance. And they have allowed our people to develop their craft, just as has been done elsewhere on this planet. You will be surprised and perhaps disbelieving to know that we have been given very advanced technology since the mid-1950s. They have given it to us. And American pilots and astronauts have been flying these things for decades. It's outrageous, I know, but this information comes from very reliable sources. Why would they want to give us this technology? Because they need our help, allegedly. Why do they need our help? They say there is a threat posed to this planet, or they said, I'm going back several decades now, that there is a threat posed to this planet by those who do not have our best interests at heart, which is why they need our help. And I have no idea what the current situation is, but this is what the Amicizia group were involved with. And this is Stefano Breccia, as I say, a scientist, a pilot, and he gave me some of the most incredible information about the technology in great detail in the book. It's in tremendous detail. And I think those of you who are interested in technology will find it fascinating. And that's Stefano Breccia, at the time that he was originally communicating with aliens in the 1950s and 1960s. He's a very highly qualified scientist. He's lectured at the former Russian Academy of Sciences. And he had many experiences with these guys. And here are some of many pictures he took in Monte Silvano in Italy, not far from where he lived at the time. And they were taken in, I would say, about 1958, something like that. You can see, I think I can point it out here, evidence of plasma. Plasma is very much, you can't see very clearly, but plasma is very much related to the propulsion system of many types of disc-shaped craft and some others. Let's just have a look at a few more here. Now, these craft, this one, Stefano, I think he flew in a craft very similar to this. It was about 12 feet in diameter. And you can see there's this light kind of misty plasma at the top of the craft. As I say, plasma is very much involved in UFO propulsion. And there's a clearer shot that he took of this 12-foot diameter craft in Monte Silvano. How about this bizarre craft? It was taken by a very distinguished science writer in Italy, Bruno Ghibaldi. I never met him, but he had a very good reputation by what I have been told about him. And this extraordinary craft over the sea in southeast Italy. One photograph. This is a craft which was submitted anonymously to Domenica del Corriere, Italian magazine, in I think it was 1963 in Genoa, this craft. At first I wasn't convinced by it, but it's quite interesting. It's very similar to the craft described by Antonio Villas Boas. Do you remember that case, the Brazilian case from way back? One of the first people to have been abducted aboard a craft, and it was very similar to this type. The most bizarre craft used by the Amicizia group was this so-called Twin Scout. It looks absolutely ludicrous, 2 pilots with individual cabins. And here is a color photograph taken by an Italian professor of Catholicism. He was a Catholic historian, very distinguished guy, Professor Bruno Sammachicia, and he took this photograph of an alleged 10-foot tall alien in Italy. And of course, people have poured a lot of scorn on it. But quite a bit of research was done. They managed to, people in later years, 1976 this was taken, people were able to know what time of year it was taken and what the length of the fir cones should be. So they worked out by that, by the nearby fir trees, that he was about 10 feet in diameter. Is he the real deal, or just an incredible hunk? Some of the Amachitsia alien groups' scribblings, well, that's impolite. They're actually very elaborate. It's some type of communication some of these guys have. Don't ask me what it means. Bruno Sammachicha was asked by the aliens with whom he was in regular contact to build like a training school for people interested to learn about other planets and alien species coming here. It was actually never finished, and it cost Bruno Sammachicha a hell of a lot of money, and it took him years to recover, actually. There were a lot of bizarre happenings. The aliens never paid in money; they paid in jewels, and they were quite generous in giving these things to people, to get other things that they required. Now, you need to know that we have actually been flying craft which we've developed. I'll come on to those that we've been given later on, that we've developed. And this goes way back to the 1958, 59, and it's an actual craft. It is not powered by any conventional power plant. You can see that. And we don't know exactly how it was powered, but I don't know who the guy squatting near it is. We simply don't know his name, but this thing did fly, and there's a photograph of it in flight. As it says, the speed that it did, it wasn't anything fantastic, certainly lower than the sound barrier. Eisenhower has had several meetings prearranged meetings with aliens. The first one was in 1954. I'll come back to that later. But this was in 1955 when suddenly, at the height of the Cold War with Russia, both the Americans and the Soviets, exploding hydrogen bombs all over the place, in the sea, in our oceans, and so forth, suddenly decided to take a quail hunting trip in the middle of the most phenomenal crisis the world had known, and people wondered about that. And officially he was going to Georgia for just a few days rest and some quail hunting. In fact, as soon as he got most of the visitors that he'd taken on board Air Force One, the plane, as soon as he got there, he was actually taken off in a secret flight in Air Force One Constellation to an Air Force base in New Mexico. And here we are, Holloman Air Force Base, New Mexico, an arranged meeting. There's Eisenhower's Constellation on the right. This is a mock-up picture, it's not a photograph. And there's the alien craft landing. It looked something like that, I believe. There's Eisenhower's Air Force One, magnificent aircraft. And this is one of the guards who had guarded quite a number of presidents. He confirms that flight was made by Eisenhower to Holloman Air Force Base. He didn't talk anything about the alien situation, but other people have testified that they saw a craft come in shortly after Eisenhower's plane had landed. And there's the passenger manifest of all the passengers that were taken. And there's quite a few came. That was the people that went for the quail hunting trip in Georgia. Just another trip narrative, just to give some sort of background to it. And when the craft was landing, just before it landed, there was this electrician up a pole doing some repair work, and suddenly this craft came into view, and he looked like he was going to be hit by it. He was absolutely terrified, and he said it was the fastest time he got down to ground from a telegraph pole in his life. In the National Enquirer actually touched on the story, and a lot of the information is accurate because I checked on it. In case you didn't know, the National Enquirer is run by the CIA, and you would think that all the stories are absolute rubbish. Well, some of them are, but as far as the UFO situation is concerned, believe me, they were very accurate. And one journalist who was sent out by certain organizations to cover events in South America said that everything that we told to the newspaper was published exactly as they'd said. Nothing was changed. This is an event in 1954. There were 2 arranged contacts, and I'm just going to. This was in 1954. I think both were at what was then called Muroc Airfield, later known as Edwards Air Force Base, California. And this is a letter from one of those who attended one of the meetings, I think almost definitely the second meeting. And as he says here, I made the journey in company with Franklin Allen of the Hearst Papers and Edwin Norse of the Brookings Institute, President Truman's erstwhile financial advisor, confidential names and so forth, and Bishop McIntyre of Los Angeles. I think you can read it. The extraordinary feeling, they said they had a distinct feeling that the world had come to an end with fantastic realism. I've never seen so many human beings in a state of complete collapse and confusion as they realized that their own world had indeed ended with such finality as to beggar description. And he goes on to say that I saw 5 separate and distinct types of aircraft being studied and handled by our Air Force officials with the assistance and permissions of the Etherians. That's how the group that was interested in this subject at the time referred to aliens as Etherians. But they were certainly very unethereal. They were very, very solid. And at one time, they made their craft and themselves invisible, which caused the president to become extremely embarrassed. And they said, we'd like to start an education program on the Earth. And Eisenhower said, I'm sorry, I just don't think we're ready for that. And they eventually agreed, apparently. Now, that was in February, and I think March, April of 1954. In 1955, in the summer, not many months after the previous one I showed you about Eisenhower's trip to Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico, a craft like this landed in Bexley Heath. I don't know how many of you have been to Bexley Heath. It's a very ordinary suburb, very pleasant in parts in South London. And I've been there many times, and this was the first event, I think July the 14th, 1955, and it was seen by many, many people. Bizarre craft, and this is a description sent to one of the UFO organizations quite a number of years later. I interviewed one of the witnesses to this event. This is a mock-up, it's not the real thing. This is one that happened several days later, also in Bexley Heath, at a crossroads. And a friend of mine, she's still alive to this day, very much so, very good researcher, Margaret Fry. She was taking one of her sons to the doctor's house, and she was accompanied by an Indian doctor who was standing in for her own doctor, and they were driving down a road very, very close to here, when suddenly the car engine conked out, ground to a halt, and this flying saucer landed in the middle of the crossroads without actually touching the ground. And it was there for not that long, probably no more than 5-10 minutes, and then it just shot up. And there were, in total of those witnesses, those 2 events, there's about 130 people. This is a guy who had some bizarre, totally unbelievable experience in the Vienna woods in 1955. A guy called Joseph Vondecker. He was actually a specialist in sabotage against the Nazis during World War II. And this is a picture of him at that time, and he felt his world had come to an end in 1955. He'd just broken up with a girlfriend, things were going wrong. And he drove around in the Vienna woods on his bicycle, as he often did, and suddenly he saw a landed craft in a clearing in the forest in the Vienna woods. And he decided that he would motorcycle right up the ramp inside the craft. He was completely nonplussed by it all, and these aliens, I think, were even more nonplussed. But they spoke English. They were very, very pleasant, men and women. And at one point, his motorbike started leaking oil, and I think they got a bit pissed off by that. And he decided it might be the appropriate moment to leave. 1954, the family, Carl Anderson and his wife and children and everything, went out to look for flying saucers in the Californian desert. And suddenly, they didn't see any flying saucers. They went to bed, but in the middle of the night, they woke up, paralyzed, to notice that their tent had been rendered invisible. So there they were, rigid, but looking out and seeing this huge craft here illuminated. And at one point, on another occasion, there was another occasion when one of the witnesses, these people went out again months later, I think the following year, and had another very similar experience. And one of them got burnt accidentally by a Very light that they'd sent up to these craft. But it's a long story, but what it led to is that eventually the principal witness was Carl Anderson was actually invited on board a craft for discussions about technology, which he, the witness, Carl Anderson, was to pass to Wernher von Braun and Hermann Oberth, both of whom were the famous pioneers of space travel. They wanted us to have their technology, and they gave every minute detail of their technology. They wanted us to have it, and Carl Anderson went to Germany, all paid for by the aliens, I believe, and he submitted all this information to Wernher von Braun and Hermann Oberth. I should say that's just one of the affidavits signed by the witnesses who were with Carl Anderson when these extraordinary events happened. Just move on. This is Hermann Oberth. I actually met him at his house in Germany in 1974, and I took this picture. And he wasn't very forthcoming. I was asking him questions about the subject, and he wasn't sort of talking too much about it. He remained stumm most of the conversation, but a very, very, very pleasant man, half Romanian, I believe. And anyway, this information was taken by the Germans, and they translated a lot of the information into building craft. And many craft have now been built by our own people on this planet. It's been going on for decades. Now, more symbols. This was provided to George Adamski. I don't know exactly when, but it's interesting. We've seen symbols from various, even in the previous presentation today. I don't know what to make of them, but Adamski claimed that one of his friends from Venus or wherever, he claimed, did these at his home. And here's an enlargement of some of those symbols. Apparently, each symbol represents a sentence. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, translations are welcomed. So, anyone needs my business card, do let me know. Many of you will have heard of Colonel Philip Corso, who wrote The Day After Roswell, very controversial work. I happen to think that most of what he wrote is absolutely genuine, based on my own information. And what didn't get published in his book, but which I've devoted some of a chapter to, is his encounter with an alien vehicle and a craft at White Sands Proving Grounds, New Mexico, when he was a battalion commander in charge of the anti-aircraft unit there. And if you don't believe me, I got all Corso's records, and here's some of them, just some of the things. He worked at the intelligence staff in the White House, all right? The Operations Coordinating Board, which was, and maybe still is, the most sensitive intelligence branch in the United States government. Corso had extremely high security clearances. And here's the information that he definitely was involved at, based at Fort Bliss, but the events that he was dealing with at that time were in New Mexico at White Sands Proving Grounds, and he was actually battalion commander. Now, there's an extraordinary chapter in my book. I've used a pseudonym, but the name will be definitely revealed in due course. He's an MBE. He served in 2 Royal Air Force bases, one of which subsequently became a naval base, in Somerset. Yeovilton was one of the stations. It was originally RAF Yeovilton. And what happened was that 2 of the aliens, and there were quite a number of aliens involved in the so-called Roswell incident. Apparently, quite a number of them had been injured. And 2 of them, who had been captured by the Americans, got so pissed off with the way the Americans were treating them, allegedly, and is that they insisted on being brought to the United Kingdom, and they were taken. One of them, the aliens were brought over from the States in a Vulcan bomber, apparently, and their craft was transported on it was a Globemaster or certainly a large American Air Force transport plane. And from 1955 to 57, my friend was in this top secret Air Force unit called Project Orange, and they were looking after these aliens for about 15 months. And eventually they recovered from their problems, and they were extraordinarily telepathic and gave a tremendous amount of information to the RAF guys involved in this. And there were some Navy people involved. And you can see some of the guys from the Air Force there. They were only doing their national service at the time when they were brought into this top secret Code Orange project. And we have here a sketch by my friend, who I call Thomas, of one of the aliens. When they were speaking, they would do this, but they didn't seem. You couldn't see their lips moving or anything, but everything could be heard very clearly in English in the ears of those who were involved. And here's one of the Royal Air Force bases, pretty much as it was at the time, I guess. I took that picture about 3 or 4 years ago. But I think you'll find that story fascinating. And this was someone I interviewed in the 1970s, Leonard Mantle, who claimed over a period of time he worked for the Borough of Westminster in London, cleaning the streets, cutting the lawns in the gardens in Soho and all that. And for 2 years running, he had encounters with someone who claimed to be an alien and gave him a lot of information. Well, Leonard found it very disturbing, actually, but the guy was quite pleasant with him. He just couldn't take it. And eventually he invited this alien back to his home in Clapham and said, look, I think you owe me a favor. I just want to know that you're what you claim to be. Can you sort of do something phenomenal for me? And this guy proceeded to stand in the middle of the room and sort of go towards the ceiling and stay there for a while. And then he came back and he said, how about that? And the other thing he did was he liked some music that Leonard was playing on the old gramophone things, and he said, "I'd like to hear that again." So Leonard got up to change the track, and the alien said, "No, don't worry," and he did it all with his mind, and the needle went back to the same track. This I wrote about this lady in my first book, Above Top Secret, many years ago. But of course, I wasn't able to name her. But I've named her because she's deceased now. Lovely lady, Pamela Handford. She was with MI6. She worked. She gave me some details of her background in that organization, Secret Intelligence Service. But in 1984, she was at a classified NASA convention in Italy, and in the next room to her was Neil Armstrong, and Buzz Aldrin was in the room beyond that, and she overheard discussions about what actually had happened on the moon, that in fact there were alien craft parked on the moon when they got there, and they were very frightened. And Pamela, incredulous at first, later confronted Armstrong at this classified conference, and he confirmed absolutely everything. He said it was very, very threatening. There were 2 alien spaceships on the moon when we got there. This is Neil Armstrong. I have been told that quite a number of the astronaut corps have actually been flying in flying saucers for quite some time. I know that Gordon Cooper has. I knew Gordon Cooper. I never met him, alas. But he confirmed to a friend of mine that he was capable of... This goes way back to 1978, and he'd been involved in the United Nations assembly discussions about the subject, and nobody got anywhere. And he said to this friend of mine, "What does it take? Do I have to fly one of these craft to the United Nations forecourt in New York to convince people?" But it never came to that. But I reliably informed that many pilots, military pilots, and astronauts have been flying saucers for quite a long time. This is one built by the Americans. I don't know exactly its method of propulsion or anything, but this was a sketch made by a friend in the United States for me, to show me what it looked like at any rate. In 1998, Teresa Tresca, as she was then called, was taken to a classified air show at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California by her father, who was in charge of several of the people working there. And she saw at this air display demonstrations of craft which we had built, of circular types like this. You can see a side view at the top there, what it looked like on top, and the side view, top, and the bottom part of the disc. That was in Vandenberg. The next year, she was taken to another classified conference, and she saw a flying triangle, and there's her descriptions of this side view of this flying triangle. And there's an underneath view. I've got a chapter called Leviathans of the Skies, giant craft which have been seen all over the world. I couldn't possibly show you them all, but this is how a craft came over Wolverhampton in 1987, seen by many witnesses. This is how Mrs. Barbara Forrest reported it at first, and this is how her son saw it, because it seemed to change its appearance as it came towards them and over them. There is a colour picture drawn by Brett, her son, 1987. Cyprus. For an entire night, from about midnight on to about, 4 or 5 in the morning, a witness sent me details of an extraordinarily large craft which hovered over the hotel and was there for a very long time, and smaller craft was seen. Let's just have a look. There is what the craft sketch by my witness described. And at one point, Royal Air Force jets came in from Akrotiri and started firing at this craft. We don't know what happened. It didn't seem to be affected by it, but this is what the witness saw. And interestingly, I got a letter from the Royal Air Force confirming that there were unidentified flying objects in that vicinity at the time. And this was all over a huge hotel in Cyprus. Flying Fairground, 1987. I mean, how bizarre do some of these craft appear? I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. But there we were, and there's shown an aircraft for comparison, a twin-engined aircraft, civil aircraft. And there were lots of witnesses. Professor Sam Greco, drawing of the many objects that appeared in his state. I've forgotten the name of the state now. I think it was Massachusetts. I'm not sure. But all the many different types of craft that people were reporting to him in a certain period. This is a sketch by Jean-Gabriel Grellet, a former Air France pilot and a fighter pilot with the United States Air Force and the French Air Force. In 1990, November the 5th, 1990, he was in charge of a martial arts class, and he just came out with his pupils, and this thing came over in a suburb of Paris, quite far from the centre of Paris, and there was a wood nearby, and it came over, and he reckoned it was about 1 kilometre in length. What I find fascinating is those triangular things at the side. Is it a kind of triangular aircraft carrier or what? I don't know, but I like to speculate. This craft was at least a mile in diameter at its widest point, and it was seen in 1996 by many witnesses in the Yukon Highway in Canada. And this was a picture it's not a photograph, unfortunately, it was reproduced in a MUFON UFO journal. Here we have one over it was Nottingham and Northampton. This giant craft appeared to many, many people in 1987. This flying slab was sent to me by a guy who was in Utah one night when this giant craft came over. He reckoned about 375 feet in length. This was seen by a guy I've met. I met him in Birmingham. He had this encounter in 2002. It was about 8 o'clock at night. And funnily enough, he couldn't. There was nobody around to talk to about it, but it came over very, very slowly, with these red apexes, just red-coloured. He didn't understand all that, but it came over very slowly, and he couldn't find anybody else around at the time to say, "Hey, can you see that?" And he was very frustrated by that. But I found him a very genuine witness. This is taken in Wales, in Monmouthshire, of several triangles flying over, which at one point just appeared to disappear, and in just small spheres could be seen, and then they changed back, morphed back into the triangle shapes that you can see there. This was a rather disturbing event in Bristol, Tennessee. It affected the main witness, and he said it was this was in October 2004. He estimated that this craft was about 300 feet length and width and 100 feet high, and there were those rib-like structures you can see. Simultaneously, his skin burnt and sound vibrated through his body. His watch lost 15 minutes, and he woke to a nosebleed, metallic taste in mouth, skin feeling sunburned, and strands of hair out when brushed later on. He was weak and nauseated. He suffered from lethargy, vomiting, hair loss, sunburn, and all sorts of things. And according to the guy who did the investigation into this case, Lockheed Martin and Boeing and the United States government showed a great deal of interest in this case. Interestingly, he'd had a brain tumor diagnosed just prior to the encounter, but it disappeared completely, according to an MRI scan some time after this encounter. This photograph was taken in Puerto Rico, where all sorts of... I've been to Puerto Rico 7 times to investigate cases there, and I found this one a particularly impressive photograph. Now, the most recent events in Puerto Rico that I'm aware of were reported to me by a lady called Maria Rivera. She had many disturbing encounters with beings that looked like this. This was one of the early ones, and I think it was in about 2007, something like that. And she awoke one night feeling rather strange, and she went to check her dog, and the dog was lying completely paralyzed on its back, and these 2 weird creatures were just staring at it. And this went on for months and months and months, and she's given details that not just she, Maria, but the entire family experienced disturbing encounters, abductions, all sorts of things. It's a long story. I can't go into all the details, but I found her convincing. Case from Sweden, going back to 1965, I think, aliens landing on a lake and communicating with a guy, Richard Höglund. There he is. And he subsequently had many encounters with these beings in the Bahamas, in Mexico, as well as in Sweden and some other countries. And there is one of the entities. Some of them were quite human appearing, others were obviously not, as you can see from this side view of one of them. Spock-like ears. 2010 in Exmouth, I think it was about 9:10 at night, this guy was walking his dog when a 100-foot disc landed in the park, and there was another witness to it. And that's his sketch of the craft. At one point, after it landed, a sort of white blob came towards the witness, at which point he and his dog ran for cover. He didn't stay around to see what the white blob was. This is former President Lyumizhinov, former president of a Russian region of Kalmykia, who claims to have had an encounter, I think in 1997, with the crew of a flying craft which approached, I think, the block of flats or the house that he was staying in Moscow at the time, and he was taken on board and shown them, and he's not actually published a great deal of information about it, but he's clearly a very, very bright guy, and he said they were people much like us. Medvedev. Well, how many of you are aware of the television broadcast in Moscow nearly a year ago? You are. Good, because you can Google it, so most of you are familiar with it. This was after a sort of basic interview with Prime Minister Medvedev, shown here on the left. And he came away from the table, and a journalist approached him, and I don't think he was aware that he was being recorded. And she asked, what about President Putin? You know, in addition to the top secret nuclear codes, does he have any information about aliens, for example? And this is what she said, and it's on tape in Russian, of course. Along with the briefcase with nuclear codes, the president, that's Putin of course, is given a special top-secret folder which in its entirety contains information about aliens who visited our planet. Along with this, you're given a report of the absolutely secret special service that exercises control over aliens on the territory of our country. I will not tell you how many of them are among us because it may cause panic. Ben Rich, great guy. In 1993, he addressed, as an alumnus, he addressed the Alumni School of Engineering at University of California in Los Angeles, 1993. And this is one of the things that he stated, and it's on the record. 1993. We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do. And that was 1993, ladies and gentlemen. Just a few little cartoons I've included in my book. I quite enjoyed this one. In case you can't read the caption, it's "Don't worry, General, I don't see them either." And I think this one speaks for itself. So, what we need is a presidential announcement and confirmation of all these things, ladies and gentlemen. So President Good will inform you. Aliens are here. There's all sorts of different types. The goodies have given us their technology, which we've had for a long time. Many of our pilots and astronauts are flying these things. NASA is probably a cover for the real work, which is done by United States Air Force Space Command. Look it up. They're the guys that are handling a lot of this situation. And I hope you found the events interesting. I hope we have time for maybe a few questions, but thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now, what we're going to do now is a bit of a Q&A for Tim Good, which is, we have got about 20 minutes, 25 minutes of Q&A.
Jolly good.
Now, this guy is a legend, so I think we should ask him some questions, because he has a vast amount of knowledge. This guy has been in places, secret places, Pentagon, UN, whatever. It's the real deal. So even though some of the cases may look fantastical and whatever, this guy's really actually gone and done it. So everything he's saying it with informed sources who are military people, political people, in the right places at the right times, confirming that there really is something going on. So, Q&As, you hold that one. Yep. Stick your hands up and I'll give you the mic. So, you choose. You choose.
No, you choose, please.
All right, Dave Taylor at the back.
I think I've got a pass for my voice.
Yeah, go on then.
What is the agenda of what would you call the bad alien?
I'm glad you asked that question, because in my book I've gone into great detail about what I've learnt in Washington from those few who are well informed about what's going on. My understanding of the overall situation is that the main problem regarding this planet is that some aliens, those involved in the hybridization process, the abductions, have set up a 100-year goal starting in the 1940s to produce a hybridized race, that is, a crossbreed between them and us. Why? Because as they are, they can't live openly amongst people or among themselves even without various methods on Earth, and they want to produce beings similar to ourselves. So they have been allegedly producing a hybridized race of more human beings as a crossbreed. And they started this in the 1940s, and it's supposed to last 100 years. And if it hasn't worked after that, hopefully, thank God, they'll give up. But the good news is that there are other aliens coming here who do have our best interests at heart, and this is why they have requested our assistance. And there is a great battle going on, if you like. about this whole situation. I know it sounds outrageous, but I mean, can you imagine a real president talking about all this stuff? I don't think so. I don't think, maybe, I don't know how much the current president knows, but it's far too embarrassing, let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, but I don't mind telling you about it.
Next question. I'm up if you want to ask a question of Tim Good. Hang on a second.
Hi Tim, superb talk by the way. Loads of really interesting cases in there, some of which I'd heard of, and other ones I hadn't heard of before. It's really good. The Holloman Air Force Base incident with Eisenhower. You didn't bring up any drawings of the beings, but I'm sure you're aware of.
Nobody has them. I mean, somebody has them.
Yeah,
that's for sure. But I've not seen them, and I was given a lot of that information by a super researcher called Art Campbell. Who lives on the West Coast in the States. So it gave me a lot of his research material.
You haven't seen a side-on view with the being with the cat-like eyes and the long earlobes down the side of the face? And
yeah, what about him?
That's supposed to be is that the being that landed at Holloman? Yeah, that's...
No, that was in Sweden.
That's from a Swedish case, because that's been muddled up with that Holloman Air Force Base case.
Not related at all.
Right, interesting. No. So these beings that did come down at Holloman, were they... what we call...
We don't know. I don't know what they... I honestly don't know what type of beings they were. Nobody has described them. I don't know what Eisenhower was taken onto their craft, and I don't think he told anyone too much about what was learnt, though that may not be accurate. But at any rate, there's no description of the aliens that he spoke with. They might have been like the humans that are very similar to us.
That's interesting. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any more questions? Right, one from the back, hang on a second. There you go, you got your hand up quick there.
Thanks, Gary. Was that the Robert Heminger thing that you're talking about there?
Sorry,
the film that Robert Heminger was doing, the Holman Air Force Base thing?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought it was.
I didn't get that first name, I'm sorry.
Robert Heminger. Heminger, sorry, my pronunciation.
Robert Heminger, he's not...
Past, present and future. The film.
Yes.
UFOs, it has begun.
Yes, there is a sort of mock-up of that case, but it's that might have been the incident.
Yeah.
Thank you, now I'm with you.
Okay. Thanks, Gary.
Any more? Right, I want to thank. There you go.
Hi, thank you very much for the lecture. You mentioned about how there's a good collection and a bad
good
collection.
Isn't bad is, yeah.
Yeah. Which side have the sort of governments of the world picked? Are they helping the good people or are they helping the bad people? Because there's some reports and stuff from abductees where they speak of military people being involved with the people doing experiments and so on.
The quick answer is I can't answer your question because I really don't know, but it's quite possible that there's something like that going along.
If there are efforts on behalf, let's say, of ETs to make contact, then why is it kept secret by our allegedly elected governments?
I think they find it too embarrassing, especially if they had to reveal the full reason why we are liaising with these people.
I've had the feeling for a while that there's probably, let's say, a tier of society on Earth who probably enjoy the fruits of all of this technology.
That's what Ben Rich hinted at. He said it's being hidden from humanity, but it's in use. We have the technology to go to the stars.
Right, so...
anything you can imagine, we already have.
I mean, the research I've done over the years, lots and lots of things, lots and lots of people, but basically there's lots of evidence to say that, for instance, we could all be energy independent. You know, we could have a little gizmo, for instance, in the corner of the room that would power the house for the next 100 years or whatever. And all of this kind of thing. My own thoughts on it, and obviously I'm not as well researched as you by any stretch of the imagination, but my own thoughts on it are that it's all tied in with, if you like, the control. Somehow or other there is a control grid on Earth, if you like, economic control, whether from the banking, all the rest of it, the energy companies. And to me, the whole ET thing just seems to I don't know, somehow jigsaw in with that whole, you know, we're kept in the dark and fed on bullmuck, basically.
I think so in many cases, that's right.
Any more questions? Well, hang on, because he's right next to me, Simon. I'll come to you next, but he's just grabbed my arm.
So?
Well, I hoped it was my arm, but anyway.
Oh.
Some of these beings seem to have the ability to dematerialise and rematerialise at will.
Or make themselves invisible, yes. And then make themselves visible again.
Have you heard much about this at all?
They just have a simple device, I believe, which at one point, I don't know what the situation is like now, but decades ago they had a device around their neck which they just touched, and you couldn't see them. But so I'm told. But you could certainly feel them if you were to go and prod them. They'd be there.
Right, I'm getting to you, Dave Dollis. I am.
Rotate the photons or something. I don't know.
Right, Simon Sharman, as I break all down the barriers.
Tim, you've obviously been doing this many years. Do you think your job, getting this word out, is becoming easier or more difficult in terms of people's attitudes?
Very slowly, a bit easier. Very slowly. Because as you know, I've been at this a long time. That's a very good question.
Do you think we'll get there, you know, within our lifetime of some kind of, at least watershed in terms of people's mentality, not necessarily an opening up of secrets?
I don't know about my lifetime, but certainly in yours and most of the audience here, I think so. But I don't know.
Right, Dave Jolliffe, I'm coming to you now, he said.
So, you want to...
Here we go, Dave.
Oh, somebody.
Tim, you mentioned Neil Armstrong.
Yes.
There's a YouTube clip of him talking. It's like in front of some cadets, and there's Clinton sat near him, and he speaks about the protective layers of truth. Have you seen that?
No.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Can I access it?
Quite emotional as he was.
Can you send it to me?
And people said he was talking about the alien problem, the UFO problem.
Interesting.
And he was trying to say it cryptically. And there were some faces pointing, you know, they seemed embarrassed, the people around him. You know, quite important people.
I look forward to seeing that. Thank you.
Alan Foster.
Alan.
Yeah, hi, Tim. In Corso's book, as you say, The Day After Roswell, he mentions the fact that these battles that may be going on between what you would call the good guys against the bad aliens is happening virtually on a daily basis. And yet this sort of tallies with some of this night vision technology that's being used to see these events up in space. That just seems to me, on a daily basis, seems too much. It's hard to believe.
A lot of people use infrared binoculars and claim to see I think it's BS, quite frank, really.
But I mean, actually, Corso writes that it is this battle is going on a virtually daily basis in the day after Roswell.
I can believe it.
Yeah, I mean, he's very credible with everything else.
I mean, for example, in 1947, when we began launching the captured V2 rockets, captured from when Werner von Braun came over to help develop the American space program with the V2 rockets, we started firing them, and immediately the craft was surrounded by some of the discs, and they put these V2 rockets off orbit, and they came down prematurely, as a result of which the Americans started firing, increasing their attack on UFOs all over the place. And they knocked down quite a number of aircraft, including the alien vehicles, including the ones actually. There was more than one craft came down at Roswell, and quite a number of aliens, according to my information from someone who actually dealt with some of them. So I think it's important to remember, but there was terrible retaliation. It was only mentioned once that suddenly the aliens retaliated against our aircraft. I mean, in 1947, airliners were crashing at the end of the runway. They couldn't get off the ground. This was happening all over the world. Planes were thrown together, military planes, all over the world. The most unbelievable complicated types of collisions with planes, and it was a dreadful business. And that's another reason why, I mean, President Truman was aware of it at the time. I only saw ever one newspaper article about it, and then it was censored after that. There has been a long continuing struggle with some of these guys. Thanks very much, Alan.
Any more questions? You got 5 minutes. Here we go.
Hi Tim, Chris Adrian. We all had very high hopes for Stephen Greer's disclosure process and more recently Steve Bassett's. What's your take on why these disclosure meetings have not been more successul in blowing this open?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know about Greer, but I'm not so interested in him. But I think what the military, a lot of the military witnesses told him is absolutely legitimate. So I don't know.
I'm just mystified about the sort of damp squib by the American press. You know, I mean, the information was out there in plain view.
Oh, sure. I've
shared by everybody on global media. So what happened?
I've included some of the best military testimony that you know, in some of it from Greer's book. I don't know. I can't answer your question fully. I don't know why.
I maybe will have a better insight because I was there for 5 days, literally as close as Miles is at the cameras, as a witness for the citizens' hearing. So I'll give you a bit of that when I do mine, about where we're going with that and what it was really like. Suffice to say, it was the best thing I've ever been involved in.
Certainly it wasn't advanced, wasn't it?
It was... I'll talk about it more in my lecture, but it was phenomenal and it was played for real. It may have been classed as a mock hearing, but it was set up like a courtroom, and bear in mind I've been in lots of courtrooms. It was done with real reverence, with real professionalism, and you're talking to a senator, former senator, and 5 congressmen and women who together had a collective public office service of 80 years. Now, these were the real people. These are the politicians we're kind of trying to reach. And I do think a lot is going on in the background, but with politics, it's extremely slow, and I think we're edging towards some kind of, probably a foreign country taking a lead. But I'll just keep that in mind. Okay, so I'll come back to that. But with any more questions for Tim? One more. All right, two more. Gentlemen in the red. All right.
Tim, it seems that good or bad aliens, they're all both in league with the secret governments throughout the world. Surely if they've got... Well, it would seem so. Otherwise, surely wouldn't the good aliens be revealing their technology to the world population, not just secret governments or governments who are prepared to keep it secret and don't think that we should benefit from it being made?
Yeah, they are revealing, the ones I know about are revealing information about technology to more than one country.
But why is that not... If we've got unlimited free power...
Why is it not what?
Why have we got so much poverty in the world? Why are we not revealing this technology to help people? Why have we got sky-high fuel bills when we could benefit from this technology?
Because they want to charge high prices. It's all money.
No, hang on a minute.
Let's
not have people shouting out, please.
I'm not qualified to talk about Tesla.
Again, when it comes onto my lecture, I'll touch on evidence and things like that, and my take on really where we are and this kind of conundrum where everything is pointing out to the fact that we have got free energy, but in reality it's about power, loss of power. Does America really want to give up the billions and trillions of dollars that it earns through armament contracts, even though they're not worth the paper they're written on? Do the oil companies want to get rid of their petroleum assets and get rid of your car petrol and be charged nothing for fresh air if a car could run on fresh air, which some people say can happen? It's all about power and greed as to why the status isn't changing. But I'll talk about that more. One more question at the back, and then we shall go into a special event, which I mentioned at the beginning of the day. And no, it's not the full Monty.
You mentioned in your talk, you used the word plasma regarding the craft.
Sorry, could you speak a bit more slowly?
You used the word plasma when you...
Plasma, yes.
Could you elaborate a bit more?
I wish I could.
What you actually mean by plasma?
And
it's in what extent it's used.
I should know all the ingredients of plasma, but it is plasma physics is a science, which has been used in by our people for quite some time, but the aliens use it for specifically related to propulsion systems.
Can you elaborate a bit further on that?
Sorry?
I could comment if you wish.
Please do.
Hi, I'm an engineer. I know a little bit about plasma. There is a plasma gasifier to destroy waste and turn it into gas for the gas grid, currently being built by an American company on Teesside, and they've already planned a second, and the British government have agreed to buy the energy from it. Plasma is an ordinary state of matter. It's nothing mysterious. It's been known about by physicists for about 100 years. It's basically where you push gas molecules to such a high temperature they break down into their charged ions, positive and negative. Once you've got positive and negative ions, you can accelerate them using a magnet in the same way as the insides of an old-fashioned TV tube work. NASA already use plasma for powering deep space probes and have been doing for certainly at least 20 years, probably longer if we knew. So it's nothing terribly mysterious. Plasma propulsion systems already exist. If you say, where do those plasma propulsion systems come from? There are plenty of big reports the size of a telephone directory saying that American human scientists developed these plasma propulsion systems for NASA 20 years ago. You make your own conclusion where they got them from.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, our resident plasma expert. I knew that question was coming, so I planted him in the audience. You know, I'm not daft, I'm ahead of the game here. Right. Now, in all seriousness, I said at the beginning of the day there was going to be kind of a surprise event. Well, Tim, this relates to you. No, you haven't done something wrong. Far from it. Strikes me that from a man who began his research in 1955, or really 1961, but he had his first eyes open to the subject in 1955. With, coincidentally, and we were talking about it yesterday, ironically, the first book on UFOs I got after my childhood sighting was by Major Donald Kehoe. And guess who Tim's book was? The first book he got on UFOs was by Major Donald Kehoe. Kind of a synchronicity, that. However, it was about 6 years later when he read the report on unidentified flying objects, which is arguably one of the best 10 books in the world on the subject, written by Captain Edward Ruppel, who was head of Project Blue Book in the US Air Force, I think 52 to 53. And that was in 1961 he read that book, and he decided that there's something really going on and I'm going to get involved in research. We talked about it before. What's the catalyst that kicks off your interest? Well, that was his. And now, in reality, so from 1961 to 2013, which I make 52 years, is that about right? 52 years from 1961, this guy has been researching UFOs. Now, he's written 12 books, and I would argue, all his books are excellent, but I would argue that his first 2 books are seminal in British ufology. Above Top Secret, in 1987, and Beyond Top Secret were fantastic books that had a major influence on me. Because when I came back to the subject in the mid-90s, having had my childhood experience, I suddenly realised that there was all these new books that had been written in the intervening years where I hadn't been really following it. And so I started looking at what was the best books around. And I was absolutely blown away by Above Top Secret, Beyond Top Secret, Nick Redfern's A Covert Agenda, all of that kind of time period. 12 books later, at the age of, if you don't mind me saying, 71, and doesn't he look good for 71? He is still doing an outstanding job. Now, what you've got to realise with Tim Good is, like I mentioned earlier, he is what he says he is. I've never spoken in the Pentagon. How many of you have spoken in the Pentagon? How many of you got senators and senior politicians who are secretly giving you information? Who is the call? How many of us have been called into the UN? So this guy is the real deal. Well, for 52 years of his life, he's been following this subject. And I tend to think that if I'm going to launch a magazine and talk about UFO Truth magazine as recognising the best work in the field, then this guy, in terms of British ufology, and obviously he's known internationally around the world, but in terms of British ufology, this guy is number one. So, the special event, Timothy, is for 52 years of hard labour at the sharp end of ufology, I'm going to present you with a Lifetime Achievement Award in cut glass. And do you want to read that out?
That's absolutely fantastic, thank you.
Read it out.
If I can. Lifetime Achievement Award presented to Timothy Good. My glasses on for the smaller people. A life dedicated to the subject of ufology on behalf of UFO Truth magazine. Thank you very, very much.
Where's the tongue? If anybody wants to get a photograph, then please come forward and get a nice picture. Just don't go too far that way, so you'll get that glare of the light. But yeah, take your photographs if you want your photographs. Now, unfortunately, Timothy has to leave at 5 o'clock today because, as many of you will know, he is a consummate violinist in his spare time, or if that's the word. And he has, I think, 14 years was it with the London Symphony Orchestra. 14 years, and he now goes all around the world as like a freelancer to various orchestras around the world. So he's heavily in demand. He knows all the people in the film world, blah blah blah. But this is he has to rehearse in London, so we're getting him a taxi, shoving him on a train, saying bye bye. Right, but you know, I honestly think that this guy, 52 years of hard labour at this subject, deserves some kind of mention. Thank you very much. Let's have a picture here. Right, so there you go. We are now on to a break for 15 minutes, and then it's unfortunately moi. So that's where we go downhill fast. There you go. 15 minutes, please.